Hello, dear history lovers. Are you ready to fall asleep listening to the powerful women of the ancient world? Where are you following and listening to us from? I would be very happy if you let us know in the comments. The discovery of Nefertiti and the rise of a controversial queen. On December 6, 1912, the German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt and his team unearthed one of the most famous historical artifacts of the ancient world. The discovery they made left an absolutely mesmerizing impression. It possessed prominent cheekbones, an elegant neck, distinct facial features, and an image so vibrant it seemed almost to be breathing. This was none other than the famous bust of Nefertiti. The bust was discovered during excavations at the workshop of a royal sculptor in the Egyptian city of Tel El Amarna. Despite being buried for over 3,000 years, it was remarkably well preserved. Beneath the thin layer of dust that covered it, the bust displayed a beauty that had defied the passage of time. Borchardt expressed his excitement at this find in his excavation diary, stating, "The colors look as if they had just been applied. The colors are vibrant, and it is an extraordinary piece of work. Description is insufficient." With this discovery, the bust of Nefertiti became one of the best-known symbols of the ancient world and Egyptian history. It suddenly emerged from the dark corners of history, regaining the splendor and fame of millennia ago. Thanks to new research on the bust, the life and story of Nefertiti came to light more clearly. However, this information also revealed another truth about her. The woman who is now a symbol of beauty and Egyptian art was in fact also known as one of the most hated figures of her own time. Nefertiti's mysterious origins. Like many important figures in ancient Egyptian history, Nefertiti's place and date of birth are not known with certainty. The prevailing view suggests that Nefertiti was born around 1370 before the Common Era in Thebes, the Egyptian capital at the time. However, a significant part of her life is still shrouded in mystery. Her life before her marriage to Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, later Akhenaten, remains unclear, and different theories have been proposed regarding her family.
The first of these theories suggests that Nefertiti was the daughter of a man named Ai, who was Amenhotep IV's teacher and advisor. However, ancient inscriptions refer to Ai's wife as her wet nurse, which suggests she was not Nefertiti's biological mother. Another theory argues that Nefertiti was the daughter of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. In this case, Nefertiti would have married Amenhotep IV, uniting her life with her full brother. Yet, this theory is also considered unlikely, as the title King's Daughter was frequently used for pharaoh's daughters in ancient Egypt, but no such title has been found for Nefertiti. Another theory proposes that Nefertiti was a princess of the Mitanni kingdom, which covered the regions of southeast Anatolia and northern Mesopotamia in modern times. According to this theory, she was initially brought to the Egyptian court to be one of Amenhotep III's wives, and after the pharaoh's death, she married his son, Amenhotep IV, and became the Queen of Egypt. The rise to power and religious revolution. When Amenhotep IV ascended the throne in Thebes in 1353 before the Common Era, this powerful woman stood beside him as his wife. Nefertiti, who was around 17 years old, stood out with her ambitious and passionate personality. Her interest in politics and religious matters made her a key figure who guided many important events during Amenhotep IV's reign. Before Amenhotep IV's accession to the throne, Egypt had a culture based on a polytheistic belief system. In this system, the strongest and most prominent god was Amun, who was considered the god of all gods. However, every individual could personally choose a god to worship. The deity Nefertiti chose for herself was Aten, the sun disk that radiated light with small hands extending from its circumference. Yet it is not entirely clear when Nefertiti's interest in the Aten cult began.
It is thought that Amenhotep IV's inclination towards the Aten cult was closely linked to Nefertiti. In fact, the tradition of worshipping Aten was not entirely new to ancient Egypt. His predecessor, Amenhotep III, had also shown great respect for Aten. However, the devotion of Amenhotep IV and Nefertiti to this cult gradually deepened, reaching an almost fanatical level. Eventually, the worship of other gods was forbidden, and order was given to close all temples in Egypt, and only Aten began to be worshipped. The change was swift and absolute. Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning servant of Aten. Queen Nefertiti did not change her name entirely. Instead, she added a title meaning beautiful are the beauties of Aten to the beginning of her name, Neferneferu Aten. The new capital, Akhetaten. The political and cultural structure of Egypt was being reshaped by the reforms of the new pharaoh and his wife. However, not everything would be easy for Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They had a serious problem to solve. Thebes, the capital of Egypt at the time, was filled with magnificent statues of the old gods, and it was like a giant mirror reflecting the cult of Amun. Getting rid of this city was necessary to break free from the shadow of the past. Yet, carrying out such a transformation in Thebes, which was surrounded by the Amun cult, seemed impossible. For this reason, Akhenaten decided to build an entirely new capital and began the search for a suitable location. According to the traditional narrative, it was Aten himself who guided Akhenaten to the location where this new capital would be founded. The chosen site was strategically quite suitable. The capital was located in Middle Egypt, positioned between the traditional administrative capital Memphis and the religious center Thebes. Thus, the most favorable area for the construction of the new capital was found.
This was a secluded, easily defended region with a fertile plain. Most importantly, it had not yet been claimed by any other cult. No place could have been more suitable for a new beginning. Near the end of the 5th year of his reign, around 1349 before the Common Era, Akhenaten made his first official visit to the region with his wife, Nefertiti. The city's name was determined as Akhetaten, meaning horizon of Aten, and the construction of the city officially began by the pharaoh's command. The construction work progressed with extraordinary speed thanks to a large quarry opened in the rocky regions to the north. Furthermore, the stones used in the construction were smaller in size compared to previous periods. These standard-sized blocks, called talatat, were much lighter than the stones used previously. Workers who had been employed in the tombs in the Valley of the Kings were brought here and settled in the workers' village built near the city. The co-regency and growing hostility. When Akhenaten visited the region again a year later, the construction was largely complete. However, the pharaoh ordered the city's boundaries to be expanded to make it look even more magnificent. This decision caused the city's construction process to be prolonged. The royal family moved to their new capital in 1346 before the Common Era. During this period, Nefertiti gained great power. Akhenaten appointed her as co-pharaoh and granted her new authorities. There had been periods that empowered queens in Egypt before, but none had ever been as influential and authoritative as Nefertiti. A temple was built in Nefertiti's name. In the depictions there, Nefertiti was portrayed punishing rebels, conducting interrogations, or meeting with foreign envoys, duties reserved only for a pharaoh. Her statues began to be made at the same height as Akhenaten's to show her equality with him. However, as in every era, change was perceived as a threat by some segments of society in Egypt 3,300 years ago. Akhenaten's reforms began to particularly disturb the noble families of Egypt and the priests of Amun. Their real objection was not to Akhenaten or Nefertiti gaining power, but to the way they used this power. The residents of the new capital, Akhetaten, were generally respectful of the pharaoh and the queen.
Most of the Egyptian people found it difficult to embrace Akhenaten's new religious reforms and the abandonment of the traditional polytheistic belief system. This situation led the public to gradually harbor hatred towards Akhenaten and Nefertiti. The royal members, in turn, retreated to their lives in the palace, seeking refuge from this negativity. Since the palace was the only place they felt safe, they began to spend a large portion of their time there. On the rare occasions when Akhenaten left the palace, he was accompanied by a considerable number of soldiers. The buildings surrounding the palace were allocated to the militia, and the number of outposts around the city was increased. The king's close bodyguards were chosen from foreign-born soldiers who were less likely to harbor animosity towards him. The royal family appeared in public for the last time in 1342 before the Common Era. From this date until Akhenaten's death in 1336 or 1334 before the Common Era, they did not attend any official ceremonies or festivals together. Nefertiti's disappearance and legacy. During this period, the couple's daughter, Nekhija-ten, died during childbirth. A relief documenting this tragedy depicts the couple silently standing over their daughter's body. Shortly thereafter, Nefertiti suddenly disappears from historical records. There are various theories about the reason for this. While Egyptian historians hold different views, one generally known fact is that Nefertiti may have fallen out of favor because she failed to give her husband a male heir. Furthermore, the possibility of her committing suicide, unable to bear the pain of losing her daughter, is also suggested. Apart from this, some theories propose that Nefertiti continued to rule under the name Semenkhare, disguised as a man. The issue of whether Nefertiti ruled alone after Akhenaten's death remains uncertain. Some theories suggest that Nefertiti may have written a letter to the Hittite king of the time, requesting him to send one of his sons to be her husband. However, this marriage never took place. The Hittite prince was allegedly assassinated on his way to Egypt. Nefertiti's attempt is quite noteworthy because it was strictly forbidden for royal women in ancient Egypt to marry foreigners. The prince's assassination was most likely carried out by Egyptian nobles who were enraged by this situation.
There are also those who argue that Nefertiti met her end through a popular uprising. If this theory is correct, the possibility that the nobles considered her wish to marry a foreigner as an act of treason gains importance. In such a scenario,
it is highly likely that Nefertiti was murdered. After her death, the political atmosphere in Egypt gradually evolved from tension into conflict. The young Tutankhamun, who ascended the throne, reopened the closed Amun temples and restored the traditional religious structure to its former importance. Aten, in turn, took its place among the ordinary gods, as it was before. The city of Akhetaten, which Akhenaten built near modern-day Amarna, was eventually abandoned and fell into ruins. The public's anger towards their former pharaoh can be clearly understood even from the surviving artifacts. In fact, this public stance was a deliberate step to forever destroy their memory and erase their names from history. However, the irony of history prevented them from fully succeeding. For example, the unearthed Nefertiti bust is still as impressive and captivating as the day it was first made. Consequently, this artifact, which has been exhibited in the Egyptian Museum in Berlin since 1924, continues to be the focus of thousands of visitors every day. No matter how much Nefertiti may have been hated in her own time, today she seems to have regained her rightful place on the stage of history. The Roman invasion of Britain. Beginning in the 1st century before the Common Era, the Roman Empire was sweeping across Europe like a whirlwind, overcoming every obstacle in its path. The communities that attempted to resist this whirlwind were in turn subjugated or eliminated. By 58 before the Common Era, Rome's sphere of influence began to expand into the northwestern regions of Italy. Caesar's Gallic War went down in history as one of the most comprehensive military operations of this period. The island of Britain, separated from continental Europe by the English Channel, had captured Caesar's attention. With its iron mines, raw gold resources, and fertile lands, the island fueled Caesar's ambition. The island was primarily ruled by the Britons, who were of Celtic origin. This local population was known for creating a frightening appearance in times of war by painting their faces with dyes made from woad and wild berries, and for striking fear into the enemy with the savage screams they emitted during battle.
Long before Caesar's expeditions to Britain, the Roman army had encountered the cousins of the Celts in Gaul and had witnessed these terrifying behaviors they exhibited in battles. However, Caesar failed to achieve lasting success in his campaigns against Britain. Forced to return to continental Europe with his army, Caesar left his ventures on the island with only minor gains. The invasion attempts regarding Britain were shelved for a long time. This period of stagnation was broken in 39 Common Era with the death of Cunobelinus, king of the Catuvalauni tribe. During this process, the leader of the Atrebates tribe, one of those mentioned, fled the political turmoil and took refuge in Rome, requesting assistance from Emperor Claudius. Thus, the Romans acquired a legitimate justification for attacking Britain. Emperor Claudius directed an army of 4 legions, commanded by the distinguished senator Aulus Plautius, to the task of conquering the island of Britain. The resistance of the Britons. In 43 Common Era, the Roman legions landed on the island and advanced into the area of present-day Kent. After a few minor skirmishes, they confronted the sons of Cunobelinus, Caraticus, and his brother near the river Medway. After long battles, the Roman army was victorious, and Caraticus was defeated. He was subsequently captured and executed by the Romans. However, his brother, Caractacus, or another reading, sought refuge in the forests, where he continued to challenge the Roman army with raids for 7 years. Nevertheless, he too was defeated and taken prisoner at the Battle of Caer Caradoc in 50 Common Era. During this period, when the Romans were overwhelming Britain, Prasutagus, the leader of the Iceni tribe, which ruled the eastern part of the island, formed an alliance with Rome. As part of this alliance, the Romans allowed Prasutagus to govern his own tribe independently, on the condition that he pay a specific tax and provide political support to Rome. Through this agreement, Prasutagus hoped that he and his family would be considered Roman citizens in the future. However, this hope was nothing more than a pipe dream. With the accession of Emperor Nero in 54 Common Era, the fate of the peoples living in Britain, especially Prasutagus's wife Boudica and their daughters, would change completely.
In the year he ascended the throne, Nero had his mother and stepbrother, who had supported him and mentored him in the early years of his imperial career, murdered. In this way, he eliminated two potential rivals who could have a say over the throne. The cruelty and insatiability of the Roman Empire were embodied in Nero's character. These characteristics soon led to a wave of oppression against the peoples ruled by Rome. Until that time, although the empire had conquered vast territories, it had not imposed heavy pressure on the island peoples and had not interfered much with their beliefs and traditions. However, Nero ordered that the pressure on the island people be increased. He thus sought to solidify their dominance on the island by preventing any questioning of Roman authority. Boudica's uprising. By 60 Common Era, Prasutagus, the king of the Iceni tribe, passed away. In his will, he allocated half of his lands to Emperor Nero and the other half to his wife, Boudica, and his two daughters. Prasutagus aimed to secure the future of his daughters and ensure the continuation of the alliance established with the Roman Empire. However, after his death, Caius Decianus, the procurator or governor of Roman Britain, went to the tribal lands and announced that control would be taken over. The new queen, Boudica, believed that the Romans had only come to take the lands bequeathed to Nero, but what she did not know was that while women and men were considered equal in British tribes, women in Rome had no right to rule. According to Caius, all the lands were the right of Emperor Nero. Boudica refused to submit to this. She was determined not to allow her lands to be taken no matter what, and she did not hesitate to start a resistance. This event ignited a conflict that would determine the fate not only of Boudica, but also of Roman rule in Britain. However, this determination led to very severe consequences. The queen, who was whipped by Roman soldiers in front of her people and daughters, experienced another trauma when the Roman procurator, Caius, went even further. The procurator allowed the soldiers to rape the queen's daughters. Rome had shown its dark side to the local populations. The queen and princesses of the Iceni tribe were humiliated, their lands plundered, their possessions confiscated, and their close relatives enslaved. Meanwhile, Emperor Nero assigned a Roman general to completely subjugate the local populations. This general, who had crossed the Atlas Mountains in 42 Common Era and achieved great victories against the tribes in North Africa, had personally had the opportunity to experience how to bring a people to submission. Now, he wanted to do the same to the Britons as he had done to the Africans.
The path to war. Paulinus, intending to assimilate the settlements and destroy the hopes for freedom, first targeted the Druid priests in Anglesey. These priests, who practiced healing and magic, were considered sacred by the British tribes. The news that Rome would attack the Druids caused unrest among the tribes. This development was a great opportunity to start a resistance against the conflicts. Queen Boudica made a move that could turn the situation to her advantage. Her goal was to unite the angry natives of Britain against Rome. To this end, she organized a meeting to garner support from the Trinovantes, Iceni, Silurus, and other anti-Roman tribes. In her speech,
the queen urged the leaders to join the fight, explaining the need to live their religion freely, be governed by their own laws, and be freed from Roman oppression. Boudica did not have to make much effort to influence the Britons. It was enough to further inflame the anger that had been smoldering within them for some time. Everyone, men and women, young and old, joined her army and began preparations for war against Rome. This struggle was not just a military war, but also a war of existence. Losing the war could mean the end not only of the army, but of an entire people. Queen Boudica, with the army she had gathered, marched to attack Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, the most important Roman city in Britain and a symbol of Roman dominance on the island. Boudica's aim was to capture this strategic city to both gain morale and strengthen her army's belief. Camulodunum was built as a typical Roman city, but the Romans had not considered it necessary to surround it with walls. At the same time, the fact that Roman General Paulinus had taken the garrison here with him when he set out on his campaign to eliminate the Druids left the city completely defenseless. The residents of the city, realizing the approaching threat, belatedly acted quickly and requested aid from Cotta Decianus in Londinium, known today as London. However, Procurator Cottus underestimated this rebellion and was content with sending only 200 Roman soldiers to the city.
The fall of Camulodunum and Londinium. 2,000 Roman soldiers from the surrounding 9 legions were called to support the city's defense. However, these soldiers were completely annihilated by a trap prepared by Boudica. With the defense thus weakened, the Celts were able to enter the city easily, meeting no significant resistance from the Romans. Boudica gave her army the order to kill everyone they encountered. At this point, the prevailing thought was to respond to Rome in its own language, for Rome had mercilessly destroyed her children. Boudica had no intention of showing mercy to the children of Rome. With this order, the Celtic army inflicted brutal methods on everyone, including women and children in the city. They carried out many horrific acts, from burning and destroying to torture. When this horrifying news reached the Roman general Paulinus, he was still engaged in a tough struggle on a different front with the Turdetani. But with this new development, he faced a difficult dilemma. If he cut short his campaign and did not intervene against Boudica's army, he would be standing by and watching the Roman cities being destroyed by the Celts. However, if he ended his current campaign, he would lose the opportunity to destroy the Turdetani. Moreover, this situation could be perceived as a sign of Rome's weakness and further strengthen the Celts' belief that they could achieve victory. Ultimately, Paulinus decided to finish the task he had started. He quickly attacked and defeated the Turdetani. Then, he prepared an advance party to assess the situation in Camulodunum and set out for the region. His legions followed him from behind. Meanwhile, Boudica had begun to advance towards her new target, Londinium. Londinium was an important city established in 43 Common Era after the Roman invasion of Britain, serving as the island's commercial center. Merchants, travelers, Roman officials, and their families lived here. Thus, the city held strategic importance for Rome.
Although Paulinus had considered defending the city, he faced the reality that the legions were still on the road. Quickly realizing that he could not defend a city without the legions, he abandoned Londinium to its fate and set off with his cavalry to meet his legions in the north. During this time, Boudica reached Londinium, where, in an act of revenge, she had all the Romans captured and impaled. She then set the city on fire. Boudica's army had completely ravaged Londinium, one of the most important centers of Roman trade. With every victory they gained, The doubts and despair within the Celtic army that they could not defeat Rome completely vanished. They were replaced by a belief full of the desire for victory. The Britons were beginning to realize that when they came together, they could inflict serious damage on the Romans. This gained them courage, so much so that many individuals in the Celtic army, such as farmers, villagers, and prisoners who had never taken part in a war before, were now eager to clash with the Roman army. Boudica's final target before confronting the Roman army in the north was the city of Verulamium on her route. Paulinus, predicting that Boudica would attack this city, ordered the region to be rapidly evacuated. The destruction of 3 cities and the final showdown. This time, the general successfully managed to save the Romans from the massacre, but could not prevent the destruction of the city. 3 cities, all symbols of the Roman dominance over Britain, had been utterly devastated one after another. Approximately 70,000 civilians lost their lives in these cities, and an additional 1,500 legionaries were killed by the Celtic soldiers. The price for what was done to Boudica and her daughters had been extremely heavy for Rome. The Roman forces, along with the legions that arrived later, were gathered in the northeast of the British territories, in an area corresponding to modern-day Watling Street. Paulinus aimed to draw Boudica's army as far west as possible to give his legions an opportunity to rest.
The Roman army was experienced in fighting on open ground, while the Celts were masters of launching sudden raids in forested areas. Paulinus took this into account when choosing the battlefield. He marched his army through narrow passes and positioned them in a suitable area surrounded by forested slopes. When the Celtic army wanted to fight, they would be forced to pass through these narrow defiles, which meant only a few soldiers could pass at a time, preventing them from utilizing their numerical superiority. Additionally, the Roman army's rear was backed against a forested area, making an attack from that direction highly difficult. The Celts aimed to take revenge on Rome and win their freedom as quickly as possible. The Romans, however, felt inevitable anxiety at the sight of the massive army standing before them. The Celtic army of approximately 120,000 people, with painted faces and war cries, created a scene that could instill fear even in professional soldiers. Speeches to the armies. To encourage his army, Paulinus turned to his soldiers and said, "Ignore the noise these barbarians make. They are not real soldiers. They do not even have proper equipment. We have defeated them before, and they are destined to be beaten again when we display our weapons and our morale." Meanwhile, Boudica, seated in her royal chariot with her 2 daughters, gave commands to her army, encouraging them to fight. Boudica's soldiers also needed courage. She addressed them saying, "I come from the lineage of a powerful man, but I am not fighting here for a kingdom or my wealth. I am fighting for the freedom that has been taken from me as an ordinary person, for the right of my wounded body, and for the revenge of my daughters, whose anger has not subsided. You too must focus on what you are after. We will leave this field either with victory or by giving our lives with honor." Following this speech, Boudica gave her army the command to charge, placing herself at the very front with her war chariot to inspire courage. Thus, her soldiers followed her, advancing rapidly towards the Roman forces. Behind the queen, the Celtic army took its place with terrifying screams. And as they emerged from the narrow passes and reached the Roman range, the command to fire spears was given.
The Roman victory. The spears thrown by the Roman soldiers largely hit the lightly armored Celtic warriors, advancing without gaps in the narrow valley. This strategy allowed the Romans to inflict heavy casualties on the Celtic army. Following the spear volleys, the Roman commander Paulinus ordered his soldiers to charge the Celtic forces without breaking their formation. In contrast to the Celts' light armor, Roman soldiers wore chainmail armor called lorica hamata, or segmented metal armor known as lorica segmentata. This armor represented the cutting edge of technology at the time. The Roman army was also equipped with long shields called scutum. The soldiers in the front row brought these shields together side by side to form a wall, while the soldiers in the back row raised their shields, providing a protective network alongside those in the front. This tactic offered excellent defense against all types of attacks. When the clash began, the technical superiority of the Romans clearly manifested itself. The Celts had to breach the shield wall formed by the Romans. However, during this attempt, they became targets of the short Roman swords called gladius, extending between the shields, and suffered heavy losses. Another advantage of the Roman soldiers was their physical endurance. Tired soldiers were withdrawn to the back ranks upon their commander's order, while fresh ones moved to the front to face the enemy. This rotation ensured that the Romans remained consistently strong and effective. As the battle progressed, the Celts, who had increased the intensity of their pressure, managed to break some Roman lines, but were also greatly exhausted. When Paulinus ordered the Roman cavalry on the flanks to begin their pressure, the Celtic army rapidly began to be depleted. The Roman army pushed Boudica's soldiers towards the narrow pass they had emerged from, causing the Celts to become trapped there. The disciplined and determined Roman soldiers were forced to push the Celtic units toward the baggage carts behind them. However, this unusual move brought about the end for the Celts. When the Romans surrounded the baggage carts, the Celts had nowhere left to retreat. After this, the Romans massacred everyone left behind, regardless of whether they were women, the elderly, or pack animals.
The end of Boudica. Boudica, to avoid falling into Roman hands, was forced to withdraw from the battlefield. As she had told her army before the battle, she decided to die with honor as a free Briton. After leaving the clash, she most likely took the poison she carried with her, ending her life by her own hands. Boudica stood against Rome, which did not recognize her as queen after her husband's death, and insulted her and her daughters as a powerful mother and queen. With this resistance, she cost Rome tens of thousands of lives in retribution for what was done to her daughters. As she drew her last breath, despite the courage she had shown, she was perhaps saddened that she could not inflict the greatest blow on Rome. The Roman Empire succeeded in suppressing the rebellion. However, it paid a heavy price for the disrespect shown to Queen Boudica with the destruction of 3 important cities it had established in Britain. Boudica's uprising was quite a dangerous situation. This revolt could inspire other tribes, and a new Boudica could start another rebellion against Rome. Rome would constantly be in anxiety because of this possibility. Cleopatra and the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. One of the powerful and famous women of a period of increasing prosperity and stability in Egypt caused the revival of Mediterranean trade thanks to the good relations established with Rome in the country. However, as she looked at the view of Alexandria, the city where she was born and raised, in the last days of her life, the scene was horrifying for her. She was forced to watch the chaos caused by the Roman soldiers in the city and the public fleeing in fear. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty would also end, and a new Roman era would begin in Egypt. Following Alexander the Great's death, his empire was divided among his generals and fell under the rule of his close friend,
the Greek commander Ptolemy. Thus, the Ptolemaic dynasty began to rise in Egypt. Until 51 before the Common Era, there had been 12 Ptolemies on the Egyptian throne, and the dynasty had been the sole ruler of the region for approximately 300 years. However, the rise of Rome began to shift this balance of power.
When Alexander the Great passed away, Rome was still a small city-state. However, the Romans had steadily expanded their territory during this time and had seized all the Mediterranean except Egypt. This situation clearly indicated that Rome's next target was Egypt. In 5-1 before the Common Era, the death of the reigning Ptolemy left 2 heirs, his 11-year-old son, Ptolemy XIII, and his 17-year-old daughter, Cleopatra. At that time, Ptolemy's will stipulated that his son and daughter should marry and rule Egypt together. This practice, which was frowned upon in many cultures, was a tradition of the ruling dynasties in Egypt. These dynasties believed that the pharaohs were descended from the gods and should only marry those who were also of divine lineage like themselves. Furthermore, the Ptolemaic dynasty, being of Greek origin, preferred sibling marriage because they did not want to fully integrate with Egyptian society. Cleopatra's ambition and exile. However, Cleopatra thought differently from her ancestors. She believed that integrating with the Egyptian people would be beneficial. To win the public's affection, she learned the Egyptian language and showed a very intense interest in the local tongue. This powerful woman, who stood out with her intelligence and abilities, also faced disadvantages because of these very traits. The nobles were reluctant to accept an intelligent woman like Cleopatra because they knew they could not easily manipulate such a woman for their own benefit. For this reason, they planned to dethrone her and make her 11-year-old younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, the sole pharaoh of the country. In particular, the chief advisor Pothinus often incited the brother against Cleopatra. Eventually, Pothinus's efforts succeeded, and in 5-4 before the Common Era, Ptolemy XIII exiled Cleopatra to Syria. This event completely changed the queen's life. On the other hand, Pothinus believed that the threat posed by Cleopatra was now eliminated. Taking advantage of this situation, he reached a position where he could manipulate the child pharaoh as he wished and rule the country from behind the scenes. However, even in exile, Cleopatra was not a woman to be underestimated.
Refusing to accept what had been done to her, Cleopatra built an army of loyal soldiers backed by public support. In 48 before the Common Era, she suddenly arrived with her army at the gates of the city of Pelusium in the northeast of Egypt. She had only one goal:
to dethrone her brother and become the sole ruler of Egypt. The threat posed by Cleopatra was quite serious. Ptolemy, seeing his sister's army advancing toward Egypt, completed his preparations and was ready to confront her. The country was inching toward a civil war. The arrival of Pompey. During the same period, wars continued in another state, the Roman Republic. Julius Caesar had defeated his rival Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus. Pompey, hoping to find support against Caesar, fled to Egypt. In the days when Pompey set foot in Egypt, Ptolemy was preparing to face Cleopatra's army. However, when the pharaoh learned of Pompey's arrival, he decided to postpone the war and return to the capital, Alexandria. Pompey hoped to gain support from Ptolemy to wage war against Caesar again. But after the Battle of Pharsalus, he had already lost the civil war and was now seen as a defeated general. Siding with him meant a great risk due to his weakened position. Caesar's arrival and Pompey's fate. The young pharaoh, who was only 14 years old that year, consulted his advisor Pothinus in this difficult situation. Pothinus suggested that Pompey's head be cut off and presented as a gift to Caesar. Ptolemy found this idea logical, hoping to earn Caesar's gratitude. Finally, by Ptolemy's command, Pompey was ambushed and killed. His severed head was mummified and prepared to be presented to Caesar. However, there was one point that Ptolemy and his advisors did not take into account. Caesar was thought to still be in the territory of the Roman Republic, but in reality, Caesar had followed Pompey by sea and reached Alexandria just a few days after the incident.
While Caesar was in Alexandria, Pompey's mummified head was presented to him. The pharaoh hoped that after this gift, Caesar would assist him in his war with Cleopatra. However, Caesar's reaction was completely different from what was expected. Caesar was quite angered when he saw Pompey's severed head. Although Pompey was his rival, he had been a political ally in the past. Moreover, Caesar's daughter Julia had at one point been married to Pompey. Regardless of the circumstances, Pompey was a Roman and did not deserve to be killed in such a humiliating manner. For this reason, Caesar, angry that the pharaoh had ordered Pompey's death, refused to support Pharaoh Ptolemy against Cleopatra. The Roman general actually did not want to get involved in the ongoing conflict between the two siblings. However, the civil war in Egypt had to end because Egypt owed Rome a massive unpaid debt. This debt, valued at exactly 17.5 million denarii, was vital for the Roman economy, which had been significantly weakened by the wars. Cleopatra's diplomacy and influence. Instead of siding with Pharaoh Ptolemy, Caesar proposed that both he and Cleopatra disband their armies and resolve their disagreement to rule the country together in accordance with their father's will. However, Pharaoh Ptolemy, influenced by his advisor Pothinus, rejected this offer. Furthermore, disregarding Caesar's request to disband his armies, he dispatched the Egyptian army under the command of Achilles to Alexandria. This move was an open challenge to Caesar. In response to this step, Caesar sent a message to Cleopatra. He thought he could reach an agreement with the young woman more easily, as she was not under the influence of an advisor. They corresponded for a while, but Cleopatra wanted a face-to-face meeting to fully influence Caesar. For this reason, she secretly came to Alexandria and met with him.
Cleopatra was a highly attractive woman. However, her charm stemmed more from her intelligence than her beauty. She could speak many languages fluently, including Latin, and knew very well how to influence people. She was also a talented orator with a strong power of persuasion. Consequently, in this meeting, Cleopatra greatly impressed Caesar with her intelligence and charm. After meeting with her, Caesar strove to reconcile the two rulers and declared them joint rulers. This situation seriously disturbed Pothinus. He believed that Caesar having a say over the Egyptian throne conflicted with the country's interests. Furthermore, he was aware that his own influence in the administration would diminish if Cleopatra seized power, and he did not like this situation at all. Thereupon, Pothinus incited the people of Alexandria against Caesar, and attempted to portray him as an enemy who had come to plunder the city. He even went so far as to publicly melt down the gold in the royal treasury to prove that Caesar could not benefit from Egypt's wealth. Caesar, to prevent events from escalating further, sent envoys to the Egyptian army, trying to explain that he was only focused on his role as an arbitrator between the two siblings. The Alexandrian War and Ptolemy's death. However, these envoys were murdered by Achilles' order. This served as a message to Caesar. The Egyptians were not willing to compromise. Since Caesar had acted quickly to catch Pompey, he had only managed to bring 3,200 infantry and about 800 cavalry from the 6th and 27th legions with him. Due to this insufficient preparation, he did not dare to venture into open ground. Instead, he requested reinforcement troops from his allies in Asia Minor and positioned his soldiers in the narrow streets around Alexandria. He hoped to counterbalance the numerical superiority of the Egyptians with this strategy, and it proved to be quite successful. While the Roman troops awaited reinforcements, battles with the Egyptian army continued for months. These clashes lasted from August of 48 before the Common Era until January of 47 before the Common Era. Finally, in January, the Roman reinforcement troops who had set out from Asia Minor reached the Nile Delta and came to Caesar's aid. Learning that these units, commanded by Mithridates, had arrived in the region, Ptolemy left Alexandria to prevent his army from being surrounded from the rear and confronted Mithridates. Caesar followed him and reached the Nile Delta, and eventually Ptolemy drowned in the Nile River while attempting to escape. This realized Cleopatra's dream. she could once again become the ruler of Egypt. Following the victory, Caesar and Cleopatra went on a 3-month cruise along the Nile. During this period, they enjoyed their victory and spent time together. And during this time, Cleopatra and Caesar had a child, whom they named Caesarion. Cleopatra hoped that this child, as both her and Caesar's heir, could rule both Rome and Egypt. At this time, Cleopatra was a young woman of 21, while Caesar was a man of 52. It was clear that Caesar was highly impressed by Cleopatra. However, it was difficult to gauge the extent to which Cleopatra was impressed by Caesar. Even before meeting him, she had made plans to influence him and had calculated the advantages of bringing someone like Caesar to her side. It indeed happened as she had thought. Caesar placed Cleopatra on the throne with her other brother, the 14-year-old Ptolemy XIV, entrusting Egypt to both of them, and returned to Rome. The assassination of Caesar and new alliances. The following year, in late 46 before the Common Era, Cleopatra paid a visit to Rome. This visit would not be brief, as she began living in Caesar's villa in Rome. However, while she was staying in Rome, Caesar was assassinated and killed in March of 44 before the Common Era. Caesar's death was a great devastation for Cleopatra. Rome was no longer a safe place for her, and she had no choice but to flee. Upon returning to Egypt, she dethroned and executed her 15-year-old brother and placed her 3-year-old son, Caesarion, on the throne.
Cleopatra had taken complete control of the administration of Egypt. After Caesar's death, a new civil war broke out in Rome. This war was waged between Caesar's supporters, Mark Antony and Caesar's nephew, Octavian, and Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Gaius Cassius. Cleopatra decided to support Octavian and Antony, who sought to avenge Caesar in this struggle. During this period, Cleopatra received some letters from Gaius Cassius, Brutus's brother-in-law and one of Caesar's assassins, and also from the Caesar supporter Publius Cornelius. She refused Cassius's request for military aid, citing internal turmoil in her country. However, she agreed to send soldiers to Cornelius. Nevertheless, these units were captured by Cassius in Palestine. In October of 42 before the Common Era, the Battle of Philippi took place, and Antony and Octavian defeated Caesar's assassins. Brutus and Cassius committed suicide after this defeat. Caesar's supporters completely seized power. After the victory, the Roman territories were divided into 3 administrative regions. The region from Spain to Greece was left to Octavian, the lands from Macedonia to Palestine to Antony, and Africa to Marcus Lepidus. Italy was nominally declared independent, but was, in reality, under Octavian's control. Although this arrangement in Rome seemed stable, it was only a matter of time before the ambition and intrigues underlying the Republic
fueled a new conflict: the allure of Antony. It was exactly during this period that Cleopatra came to Tarsus, showcasing the magnificent wealth and impressive charm of Egypt. Cleopatra, disguised as the goddess Venus, was so magnificent that she completely enchanted Mark Antony. With a style and character very different from Roman women, Cleopatra managed to capture Antony's interest, and they subsequently fell in love. In the same year, Cleopatra invited Antony to Alexandria. Thanks to this invitation, they spent more time together and grew closer. As a result of this relationship, the following year, Cleopatra gave birth to a pair of twins, a boy and a girl, whom they named Helios, the sun, and Selene, the moon.
However, Antony was married at the time, but his wife passed away while he was with Cleopatra. Thus, there was no longer any obstacle to their union. Yet, Octavian demanded that Antony marry his own sister, Octavia. This marriage would serve to strengthen the political ties between the two allies. Although Antony was deeply in love with Cleopatra, he submitted to this political necessity and married Octavia. Otherwise, the alliance could be jeopardized, and Antony might find himself in a new civil war. The Parthian campaign and the donations of Alexandria. As the summer of 36 before the Common Era ended, Antony set out on a campaign against the Parthians with a massive army of 84,000 soldiers. Antony planned to return to Roman territory after seizing control of Armenia and Media, spend the coming winter there, and then continue his Parthian campaign. However, instead of this plan, he completed his expedition and wanted to return to Cleopatra's side in Alexandria during the summer to celebrate his victory. These desires made him more prone to making mistakes. Rushing to complete the campaign quickly, he left behind the wagons carrying food, grain stocks, and siege equipment, and advanced deep into Parthian territory. Antony thought that the units carrying the equipment left behind would catch up with him. However, the Parthians, learning that the Roman units were divided, took advantage of this opportunity. With sudden attacks, they destroyed the siege weapons and the army's food sources. Faced with this heavy blow, Antony realized he was losing the war and retreated, but had lost 1/3 of his army. Consequently, he had become captive of his enthusiasm, suffered losses due to his haste, and his reputation was damaged. In the same period, Octavian won a victory in the Illyrian campaign and managed to increase his popularity in Rome. This situation began to pit the allies involved in the struggle for power against each other.
Antony, wanting to compensate for the heavy defeat he had suffered, organized a new campaign to the Caucasus in 34 before the Common Era, once again capturing Armenia
and Medea. However, this time he chose not to advance into Parthian territory. Instead, he returned to Alexandria and organized a triumph. During the celebrations, he granted his gifts, known as the Donations of Alexandria, to Cleopatra and their children, the eastern part of Libya, Syria, Phoenicia, Lycia, Armenia, and Medea. Not stopping there, he divorced his wife Octavia and married Cleopatra. Thus, he openly revealed his intention to establish a new dynasty. Antony dreamed of ruling alongside his beloved Cleopatra and having all the lands left to Cleopatra and their children upon their deaths. The Battle of Actium and the final moments. However, Octavian had no intention of accepting these donations. He publicly read the documents regarding Antony's gifts in the Roman Senate and announced that the Roman territories in the east had been left to Cleopatra and her children. He also declared that Antony aimed to leave Rome with Cleopatra and establish a different kingdom. This situation shocked the Romans. It was impossible for the Senate to recognize these donations made to Cleopatra, and it did not. Nevertheless, Octavian did not want to appear to be starting a civil war, so he presented the matter as an external threat and explicitly directed the declaration of war not at Antony, but at Cleopatra. Antony and his army, who ruled Egypt with Cleopatra, clashed with Octavian's army at the port of Actium in September of 31 before the Common Era. Octavian's forces besieged the port in the region and won the Battle of Actium, known as one of the most important naval battles in history. Cleopatra and Mark Antony were forced to breach the blockade with their treasure-laden ships and flee to Egypt. However, Octavian did not give up the pursuit and eventually reached Alexandria. After a fierce struggle lasting several months, Alexandria fell into Octavian's hands. As the city was devastated, the situation became increasingly desperate for Cleopatra, and she was eventually forced to take refuge in a monument tomb.
Antony, unable to find Cleopatra, thought she was dead and, deeply saddened, tried to commit suicide by plunging his sword into himself. However, the blow did not kill him instantly. After a while, he received the news that Cleopatra was actually still alive. With the help of some Egyptians, he was taken to the monument tomb where Cleopatra was, and there he took his last breath in the arms of the woman he loved. After Antony's death, Cleopatra drank poison and ended her life to avoid the humiliation of the Romans. She was a queen, and she chose to die like a queen. She had been dethroned by her brother before. Rather than losing her throne again and being humiliated, she chose to die with honor. Cleopatra, who took the throne during one of the weakest periods of the Ptolemaic dynasty, managed to influence two great Romans with her intelligence, leveraging their power to protect her throne. Not content with this,
Cleopatra aimed to restore her country to its former glorious days. The lands she gained through the donations of Alexandria brought her one step closer to realizing these desires. Throughout her rule, she managed to maintain balance like a tightrope walker on a thin line. However, her marriage to Antony and the idea of convincing him to incorporate Roman territories into Egypt was a major mistake and became the most critical move that destroyed her grand ambitions. With the death of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, the lands of Egypt fell into Roman hands, and the pharaonic period in ancient Egyptian history came to an end. No pharaoh ever sat on the throne again after this. A great era of history was officially closed. In the first half of the 6th century Common Era, the Roman Empire continued to experience its golden age. Introducing Theodora, the Emperor Justinian, considered the most powerful man in the world during that time, directed his commanders to launch campaigns both to the east and to the west, while he himself was preoccupied with reforms that would shape world history. Justinian was a leader who reigned between war and peace, chaos and order, and profoundly influenced history. His name would never be erased from the pages of history. However, behind this powerful image was his wife, Theodora, one of the most controversial figures in Byzantine history. Theodora's life story, in turn, took an extraordinary path.
Theodora's humble beginnings. Born in Constantinople in the year 500 Common Era, Theodora did not hail from an aristocratic lineage. Her father, Acacius, worked as a bear trainer for the Greens faction in the Hippodrome races. Her mother was a dancer and actress. Therefore, Theodora had a humble background. However, those who believed she did not deserve the high position she achieved after becoming empress criticized her not merely for her origins, but also for her personal choices. The difficulties in Theodora's life began with her father's illness. Acacius soon passed away, leaving his wife and 3 children in a desperate situation. The income from Acacius's bear training, the family's source of livelihood, had ceased, and the Greens faction had already hired someone new for the vacant position. Worse still, the faction had no intention of extending a helping hand to Theodora's family. The mother, in a difficult position, married another man to support her family, but things did not go as planned. Her new husband was unemployed, and the family quickly spiraled toward the brink of poverty. The stigma of the stage. During these difficult times, the Blues faction, the rival of the Greens, came to the family's aid. Theodora's stepfather was hired as a bear trainer for the Blues faction. Her mother, however, wanted her daughters to contribute to the family's income by performing on stage in shows. Yet, due to the social understanding of the time, the profession of acting was extremely despised. In ancient Rome, an actor was considered to be in the same class as slaves and prostitutes.
Even a free individual who decided to pursue this profession could lose their citizenship rights. Furthermore, actors didn't even have freedom of expression, and in most cases, the perpetrator could go unpunished if they were murdered by someone else. This negative perception had still not changed during Theodora's time. According to the historian Procopius's work, The Secret History, following her father's death, Theodora and her sisters began to participate in shows and perform on stage. This challenging beginning would be the first step in her life, leading to an unimaginable rise.
After a while, these shows became sexually suggestive, both on and off stage. The woman who earned her living by using her body captivated many people from both the lower and upper strata of society, with her charm, beauty, and graceful dancing. However, despite being admired on stage and in the brothel, there were also those who tried to stay away from her allure. If they encountered her on the street, they would step to the side, fearing that both their souls and their clothing would be contaminated if they accidentally touched her. A necessary caution. However, it is beneficial to approach these lines written about the future empress with caution. This is because many historians believe that Procopius's work, The Secret History, was primarily intended to defame Theodora and Justinian. Whether the narratives are true or not, it was clear that Theodora's lifestyle was not suitable for an intelligent and talented woman. She needed to find new ways to bring out her strong personality. Otherwise, the life she led would gradually wear her down and consume her. When she turned 20, she caught the attention of a diplomat named Hesperus, who was appointed governor of North Africa. With her beauty and youth, she had caught a significant opportunity to escape this life, and she intended to seize this chance. However, fate was once again not on her side. Shortly after arriving in North Africa, her lover abandoned her and threw her out. On her return to Constantinople, she had the opportunity to meet influential individuals and patriarchs in the cities she stopped in. Her conversations with the clerics deeply affected her. Theodora turned to the doctrine of monophysitism, which believed that the divine and human natures of Jesus Christ were united in the same body. Transformation and a new life. She began to slowly leave her old life behind, learning manners and acquiring new skills. When she arrived in Constantinople in 522 Common Era, she had left her previous life behind and gained a new identity for herself. She no longer considered performing on stage or working in the brothel. She earned her living by dedicating most of her time to spinning. At the same time, she focused on religious matters and tried to lead a more introverted life. However, no matter how reclusive a life she tried to lead, her beauty was eventually destined to bring her into contact with a respected man. Justinian, the nephew of the Roman Emperor Justin I,
fell in love with Theodora the moment he first saw her. Theodora did not remain indifferent to this interest either. Since Justinian was the future emperor, this relationship was a great opportunity for Theodora's rise. The young woman accepted his proposal of marriage, but there were some obstacles. A law enacted by Emperor Constantine about 2 centuries earlier prohibited government officials from marrying actresses. Justinian was the sole heir of his uncle, Justin I, and served as a consul. This position meant that the law in question also applied to him. Marriage to Justinian. Events in Rome indeed unfolded in this manner. With the death of Euphemia, or Euphemian, who lived until 524 Common Era, the obstacles in Justinian and Theodora's lives began to disappear. Justinian, with great determination, set out to persuade his uncle to remove the legal barrier to this marriage. In fact, Emperor Justin I did not have a serious objection to the marriage. He was only appearing to adopt a different stance to avoid problems with his late wife, Euphemia. However, after Euphemia's death, he gained the freedom to act as he wished, and could no longer resist Justinian's endless insistence. In 524 Common Era, a new law was enacted, making it possible for actresses, with the emperor's approval, to marry someone outside of their social class. With this change, the final obstacle to Theodora and Justinian's happiness was removed, and the couple married in a magnificent ceremony in 525 Common Era. But happiness was not just limited to this. 3 years later, with the death of Emperor Justin I in 528 Common Era, Justinian became the new ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire. He was now one of the most powerful people in the world. This change profoundly affected not only Justinian's life, but also Theodora's. Theodora, a former stage performer, who was ostracized and looked down upon by society because of this, quickly reversed all these negative perspectives by acquiring the title of Byzantine Empress. Theodora, who had always taken on the mission of being a figure who changed society's views, occasionally felt shame about her past, but did not make a significant effort to conceal it. So much so that she even took her illegitimate daughter, believed to be from her life before Justinian, into the palace with her. Justinian, too, showed understanding for this situation and did not create a problem regarding her past.
The powerful Empress. However, she needed to take a strong stance against those who tried to remind her of where she came from. Theodora projected a superior image in every aspect as a great empress, and in this regard, she acted by knowing the importance of outward appearance well. Purple robes, dazzling gold, and shimmering jewels were the most prominent symbols of the power she wielded, and she often maintained this image. Visitors or diplomatic delegations to the imperial palace were generally kept waiting for hours before being admitted into her presence. Some who found it difficult to accept this situation were inclined to see Theodora merely as a young, beautiful wife of an elderly emperor. However, they were often forced to submit in the face of her status and influential demeanor. According to some, Theodora had become an extraordinary figure, transcending the position of a mere companion wife. To rule the empire from behind the scenes, She played an active role in state affairs, being decisive in the adoption of many important decisions. This situation solidified her place in history, not only as a powerful empress, but also as a great policymaker and leader figure. Indeed, Theodora possessed the competence to undertake such responsibilities. She had spent a large portion of her time reading books, making an intense effort to improve herself. With this dedication, she successfully fulfilled the role of constantly supporting her husband's powerful position. However, the shadow of the past never left her. Both the whispers in the dark corners and the openly voiced statements did not escape the Empress's attention. Yet, Theodora's never contesting these comments about her past was seen as a defiance against the hostile attacks directed at her. She had been forced to make many sacrifices as a woman to survive. She had been humiliated for a long time, perhaps forced to live a life she did not want, and finally retreated into seclusion. The champion of women's rights. Afterwards, she unexpectedly met Justinian I and suddenly found herself in a position she could never have anticipated. Power was now in her hands, and she was determined to use this power by upholding the memory of the former Theodora who had been lost in the world of men. During a period when Justinian was subjecting the empire to radical changes through the comprehensive reforms he implemented, Theodora also began to use her own power to advocate for women's rights. For instance, in 528 Common Era, she protected women of all classes by bringing in the death penalty for the crimes of abduction and rape. In 534 and 535 Common Era, she passed laws that criminalized forcing women into prostitution. She also made regulations that secured women's rights regarding divorce and the division of property, and she prohibited the killing of women for adultery.
While all these progressive steps were being taken, Justinian continually supported Theodora and accepted her views. Nevertheless, historical records indicate that Theodora was sometimes referred to as a conceited and despotic empress. She was able to dismiss some officials, compel those around her to marry according to her wishes, and displayed quite severe behavior towards some figures she regarded as rivals. There are even various rumors about her role in the death of a Gothic queen who challenged her. The Nika riots. While Theodora drew attention with all these initiatives, Justinian focused on conquering new territories and undertaking major construction projects that would multiply the splendor of Constantinople. He was an ambitious, innovative emperor who did not hesitate to take great risks when necessary. He often neglected to rest or eat, sometimes sleeping for only an hour a night. His goal was to make Constantinople the most magnificent city in the world. However, to achieve this, he needed a massive source of revenue, and he needed to access this source as quickly as possible. The first measure he implemented in this direction was the increase in taxes collected from the public. However, this situation caused serious discontent within the borders of the empire. Waves of unrest swept the city, from the palace to the farthest corners. To cope with this growing discontent,
Justinian resorted to appealing to the loyalty of the Blues faction, which held a key place in Byzantine politics. The hippodrome races held in Rome were not merely spectacles. Each group participating in the races was actually a representation of different political views. They were divided into various groups: the Greens, the Blues, the Reds, and the Whites. Emperors generally supported one of these groups and openly demonstrated this support. Justinian, in particular, supported the Blues faction. However, the Blues were far from being a group the emperor could rely on with confidence. This ambitious and armed group often engaged in illegal activities and disregarded the public's grievances for their own benefit.
Emperor Justinian's desire to make Constantinople a more magnificent city did not mean much to the Blues. Yes, Justinian had formed an alliance with the Blues to advance his own policies. But this alliance's loyalty to the empire did not last long. The tension between the Greens and the Blues in Eastern Roman politics persisted during Justinian's reign. Finally, in January 532 Common Era, this rivalry ignited a great rebellion that brought the empire to the brink of collapse. Theodora's defiance. Death is better. The events began when the governor of Constantinople arrested and imprisoned some individuals from the Blues faction on charges of murder. The punishment planned for these individuals was execution. During the races held at the hippodrome, both the Greens and the Blues rose up and turned into a rebellion. The rebels targeted Justinian and his magnificent city, Constantinople. The enraged rebels began to loot the city. Their demands from the administration were clear. The prisoners accused of murder must be handed over to them. However, Justinian categorically refused this request. Becoming even more aggressive when their demands were not met, the rebels plunged the city into chaos. Justinian, Theodora, and senior military officials took refuge in the palace and began to contemplate what to do. Their hope was that the rebellion would subside on its own if they did not intervene, but things did not progress as they wished. The rebels had taken advantage of the emperor's retreat and had already begun searching for a new ruler. Their goal was to overthrow Justinian and place Hypatius, the nephew of the former emperor Anastasius, on the throne instead. They even established a throne in the hippodrome and proclaimed Hypatius the new emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire. As the city turned into a war zone, Justinian was making escape plans in his palace. Even high-ranking military officers like General Narses and Belisarius thought this plan was logical, believing that fleeing was the best solution. But Empress Theodora thought differently and had no intention of escaping. She knew she had not gained her power easily and did not want to lose it in a single day. Finally, in a determined voice, her words began to echo in the vast hall of the palace. "It is shameful for an emperor to live as a fugitive. If you wish to save your lives, it is easy to do so. The sea is before you, and the ships await your command. But know that death is even better than the shame that will be lived." The enduring legacy.
Empress Theodora, one of the most influential figures in the Eastern Roman Empire, carved an unforgettable place in the annals of history with both her strong stance and her intelligence. This powerful ruler, who described the imperial purple as the noblest shroud, spent her youth in struggles. Theodora's determination, who spared no sacrifice to preserve her honor, became a source of inspiration for Emperor Justinian, prompting him to act with great courage. In the historical event known as the Nika riots, the panic in the palace was dispersed by Theodora's resolve. The army, led by General Belisarius and Commander Mundus, suppressed the rebellion and restored control. Over 30,000 rebels lost their lives during the counterattacks. Hypatius, who had been proclaimed emperor during the uprising, was captured and executed at Theodora's insistence. This bloody event was recorded as one of the most shocking incidents in Eastern Roman history. Justinian and Theodora successfully secured their rule by quelling the rebellion. The people of Constantinople understood that this couple could no longer be dethroned, and the biggest credit for this belonged to Theodora's firm stance. Theodora, who exhibited a leadership that was not limited to suppressing rebellions, proved her administrative skills once again in 540 Common Era, when the empire was reeling under the effects of the plague. With Justinian confined to his bed due to illness, state affairs came completely under her control. During this challenging process, Theodora steadfastly maintained control of the administration and managed to protect the empire while waiting for her husband to recover. Theodora, a good leader, as well as a creator of a strong bond between spouses, became a figure who shaped history with her will and determination. However, the presence of Justinian, her greatest supporter in her success, is also an undeniable truth. Thanks to their mutual respect and cooperation, they overcame all difficulties and set an exemplary reign.
The couple, who lived in harmony despite having different beliefs and were able to make joint decisions, managed to protect their religious differences within a framework of respect. The close relationship between Theodora, who adopted the monophysite belief at a young age, and Justinian, a staunch follower of Chalcedonian Christianity, had a great impact on this harmony. As with every story, this great period of leadership also came to an end. Theodora passed away on June 28, 548 Common Era. She left behind her unforgettable works and the historical place she earned with her strong personality. Justinian made it one of the most important duties of his life to keep his wife's memory alive. He kept her legacy vibrant by enacting progressive laws concerning women's rights. Furthermore, Justinian, not forgetting his promise to his wife, continued to protect the monophysite community. The intelligent, powerful, and charismatic Theodora passed through Constantinople, leaving a deep and admirable mark on history. A woman who succeeded in having a say in the Eastern Roman Empire, an actress, a courtesan, and an empress, Theodora rose from the back alleys of Constantinople, challenged her fate, and completed her story, which began as a young woman of questionable reputation as one of the most influential women in the world, succeeding in writing her name in golden letters in history.